So with that, I'll throw it over to Greg, and thanks for coming out.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you all for coming. As you mentioned, this is the third installment of the X Cities series that Anthony and I are putting on. For those of you who are new to X Cities for the first time, the X in X Cities stands for the X marks the spot of the intersection of mass urbanization and technology, and the ubiquity of technology within cities. And so we also called it X because basically this is sort of what falls into the domain of smart cities, but we wanted to sort of unmoor it from smart because that is it's part of many different marketing campaigns by many different companies, including one here tonight. And so basically tonight is the third session. The theme is governance and the governance of the X City. And so tonight we have a representative from IBM, Dr. Banavar, who is the Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of Global Public Sector in IBM, also the CTO of their Smarter Cities Initiative, who you may have seen most recently on the front page of the business section of the Sunday Times, talking about the Rio Operations Center, which has really become sort of IBM's flagship product in this, and he's going to be showing and talking about that tonight. And then we're pairing him with Leif Percifeld, who is the creator of Don'tFlush.me, which is a very lightweight sensor network for sensing when it's unsafe to flush into New York City Harbor. He's also a member of the Public Laboratory, and he's going to talk about both Don'tFlush.me and his new project, the Air Quality Egg, which is another sort of lightweight sensor network. Both of these sort of intersect in the section of notion of governance, which is how will we govern cities that are wired with sensors either created through government entities or lightweight distributed through citizenry. How will we sort of create unifying structures? How will we use the knowledge that we're collecting and then transfer it into actually governing the cities in which we live? And so hopefully tonight's pairing will give you two sort of interesting contrasts of one that is massively well funded and backed by the city government of Rio de Janeiro, and then one that is extremely lightweight and rolled out on an individual by individual basis. And hopefully those two intersections will throw off some sparks and get you asking questions. So we flipped a coin, and Dr. Banavar will go first.
Thank you.
Audio for your video here.
Okay, Greg, thank you. I guess I should use the microphone because of the video recording. Okay. Great. So it's great to be here. Thank you very much for coming out. I just want to have an interactive discussion about some of the work we're doing. So as part of my job doing smarter cities around the world, I encounter a lot of different kinds of cities, and each of them has sort of a set of unique problems. And it's very difficult to say, how to generalize across all of these, right? There's so many different ways that you can slice and dice all of this stuff. But I think, if I just step back and look at the very large number of projects that we've done, a fair way to sort of think through some of the challenges that these cities face is to look at growth markets versus major market type cities, just because of the demographic changes, the investments going into these cities in the growth markets or the major markets, the kinds of growth patterns you see. I grew up in India most of my life, so I know how cities like Mumbai develop, and Bangalore, which is my hometown, has changed in the last, let's say, 10 years or so. But when I look at cities in the developed world, they have a different set of problems. Now it's really more about managing an aging population, managing a very tight budget, managing the changes that the technologies that were installed maybe 100 years ago or so are bringing about. Maybe some of them are breaking down now, and it's time to sort of rethink what to do in the next generation and so forth. Whereas all of these cities in the growth markets or the emerging markets that I work with are, in many cases, leapfrogging, right? And they're putting in all of these new, not only the new technologies. I want to think about all the new ideas. Starting from the governance of the cities to how you utilize the social networking possibilities available within large communities. How do you use brainstorming in different ways within cities to plan them, operate them, and so forth. So there's so many of these interesting contrasts between the emerging markets and the developed markets that I might come back to in the discussion today. And I'd love to hear your questions or your comments, and maybe I can play off of some of those. What I wanted to focus today was to give you a sense of what it means to operate a city, right? So I think from an urban, design or urban, architecture, urban systems community, we come in from the perspective of, designing and architecting our ideal city. And of course, the best thing that you could have is a blank sheet of paper where you can do whatever you want it, and it's just going to be the perfect city. But 99% of the cities are not that, right? It's going to be some decisions that were made either organically by the community or by some pseudo sort of design philosophy that may have happened hundreds of years ago. And has only been incrementally changing. And this is, a set of constraints, a set of requirements that has been placed upon a city a long time ago. And that is something we have to live with for hundreds of years. And, every year when the city government has to decide a budget and figure out what to do with the budget, how much of it to redesign pieces of the city, how much of it to plumb the infrastructure within the city, how much of it to manage the big events in the city or the big changes in the city, the big demographic trends that are coming up and so forth. There are some very difficult decisions that city governments must make. I think the city of Rio de Janeiro is a great example of thinking through what it means to operate a city that has a legacy of, definitely, hundreds of years. But even if you look at just the last 50 years, the history of Rio de Janeiro has been, a roller coaster, right? It was the capital of Brazil. And it was glorious because the Portuguese really had a strong cultural base there. It was flourishing, about 50 years ago or a little more than that. But then there was this decision to move the capital of Brazil to Brasilia, in the interior, which was designed by Oscar Niemeyer, but which you may all have some familiarity with. But Rio basically was neglected for decades, and it pretty much went downhill. There was a series of mediocre or to poor governments that basically did very little to keep up the cultural richness and the potential and bring the potential of Rio. Which, by the way, if you know Rio, you will recognize the beauty of that place, right? It's geologically or just naturally, it's just such a great city. And in addition to that, you have all of the cultural things that have happened over there, like the mixture of the European, the African and the native populations have resulted in some tremendous new cultural things, like, for example, samba, which I'm a fan of, that has changed. It's brought a new way of thinking about urban culture, with the carnival and all of that becoming the fundamental basis of all of that. So in that kind of an environment, there's also been a lot of areas that were neglected, which ended up being taken over by squatters, which ended up becoming favelas. You've seen the really horrible aftermath of some of these, drug fights. Really, I mean, just last week, by the way, I was in Brasilia, and the speaker before me was Secretary Beltrami, who is the current leader. He's just been around for the last, I think, couple of years. he's the public safety secretary who made the decision that he would infiltrate the favelas and he would get the drug lords out of some of the favelas. He works for the state of Rio de Janeiro, not for the city. But he decided to make that big decision. He went in with, essentially looks at it as a military campaign to get these drug lords out of these favelas. And that's resulted in a lot of changes in the city. It's made a lot of these communities safer. And it has also resulted in sort of a redistribution of the population within the city. It's not the south is the rich, educated community. The north of the city, the center of the city, is this sort of a black hole where it's all drugs and crime and all of that stuff is no longer the case. Lapa, which is the community where the cultural heritage happened, is now a vibrant, district that lots of things happen, right? So that's happening from a public safety perspective. However, if you look at the future, with the World Cup coming in 2014 and the Olympics coming in 2016, there's also all of this sudden focus of the whole world on Rio, right? Because we now have all of these, it's on the world stage for all of these big events, not just the World Cup and the Olympics. It's almost every year there's something big happening. There's something called the Rio +20 meeting that's happening in a couple of months, and then there's the Federation Cup, the World Cup, and then so on and so forth. And there's huge events that are asking for new ways of thinking for the city. And so the mayor of Rio de Janeiro, which is Mayor Eduardo Paes, has of course made some very, very transformative decisions. As the mayor, by the way, he gave a TED talk just last month. If you haven't seen this, it's worth seeing what he thinks of as the future of cities. But he made the decision 2 years ago to change the way the city operates on a day-to-day basis. He didn't decide to change the plan of the city. It's not a major urban planning change. It's a major urban operation change. And I want to use this example as a way to understand the inter relationship and the feedback that happens between the planning and the operations. Operations, as I said, goes on for hundreds of years. So now he's put together a new way of operating the city, which I think is instructive for us to learn for many other cities. And I'm, of course, takes many of these ideas to other cities that I've worked with as well. But I'm going to focus on Rio for today, just because there's so many great lessons to be learned from this example. So April 2010 was the month in which Rio had the worst flooding that it's ever had in its history, which, as a result of the constant, torrential rains that they get during the summers, the southern hemisphere summers, somewhere between December and April, resulted in some of the hillsides in Rio to essentially give up. They had mudslides, and those mudslides took down a lot of these, shackle housing that was put in place over there illegally, and that resulted in about 100 people dying. And the mayor basically said that this is the worst thing that he has ever seen. It was in fact the worst natural disaster in the city of Rio de Janeiro in recorded history. And he said, I'm not going to let this happen one more time. And it turned out that we met him from IBM in May of 2010, just a month after this disaster happened. And he said, look, the most help you can do for me is if you can give me a system with which I can ideally prevent, right? But that's very, very difficult to do. But at the least manage these kinds of disasters that can help me, plan for how to, evacuate, how to support, how to, design, I'm sorry, not design, but recover from the aftermath of one of these kinds of disasters. And so we took on that challenge, and we started designing what ended up being a change in the governance of the city. Because fundamentally emergencies, are one of those those events that bring together a lot of silos that otherwise wouldn't come together in a city. Whether it's a transportation department, police department, social services department, health department, all of these guys have their own budgets, they have their own plans, they have their own long-term horizons, but they don't think about, what do I need to do along with my other fellow departments in order to help the city manage better, except when there's an emergency. And everybody realizes, oh boy, we haven't really thought through how do we interact with each other. That's what we did not want to have. So we ended up starting to design a system for managing disasters. But that quickly, over the course of about 3 or 4 months, ended up becoming a broader thing than disasters and emergencies. It became, how do I manage events in the city on a day-to-day basis? Now, when I say events, I'm not talking about just the big events like the World Cup and the Olympics. I'm talking about, the big rock concert that's going to happen in Copacabana 2 weekends from now, or even during Carnival, the number of different parties that happen. I mean, that there's 5 or 6 million people who show up over there during Carnival, and there's hundreds of these street parties that happen for more than a week, and these street parties are very difficult to coordinate and just make sure that bad things don't happen. So how do I make sure that these events are managed in an appropriate way? So that became the overall goal of our project. And very quickly, the mayor decided to build a brand new building for housing this whole enterprise, I would think of it as, because it's never been done before. And I even today, I can't say that I've seen any other city that has this level of coordinated governance within one city. And so you'll see in this video that I'm going to show you that he constructed a building, he brought together all of these departments. Now we have 30 departments in the city, all co-located. They have a common protocol for all events, not just for disasters, for any event that they want to plan. And planning is not a long-term planning thought here. This is about, I know that there's going to be an event next week. How do I plan for it? It usually starts about a couple of days before the event. So it's operational planning, not long-term urban planning, but operational planning for events. That's really what it is. So this center is an operations center that we ended up building. And that building has a new office for the mayor. It has a new, press room where, everything that's going on in the city is available to the entire press. They have radio and television programs happening there every day. They have a command center, which has all the department operators watching and getting the common operational picture of what is going on in the city. So if there is a really big event, like a rock concert or a carnival or whatever it is, every department has a view of what's going on, so that they don't, start digging the street that leads up to the stadium 3 days before the concert happens, so that it's not going to be, it's not going to be finished in time for the concert, etc. Same thing with, if there's rains during the event, the Department of Lighting, the Department of Social Services, all of these departments are aware of what is going on. So that operational model is the new thing that has defined and transformed Rio de Janeiro. From the point of view of technology, I have to, I'm a technologist. I'm a chief technology officer, and that, my background is all in computing. The role of technology is very, very significant in this entire transformation. Right? It's not only about taking information from the physical world, like, for example, through sensors, and bringing it into the operation center for everybody to have a common view of what is going on. But it's also about using communication technology, or workflow and structured coordination technology. It's also about a piece of work that we've done there to model the city's geography and the city's environment, so that we now have the highest resolution weather forecasting and flood simulation system anywhere that I know of in the city of Rio de Janeiro. So that, they get a warning several hours, 36 to 48 hours ahead of when bad storm is going to hit, and they can even simulate and see what's likely the impact. And it's new because it has a very high resolution. It can go down to a resolution of 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, as opposed to the commercial standard things that you see, which is 6 or more kilometers by 6 or more kilometers. So this is very high resolution. So you can see what's going to happen in the Olympic Village, for example. And then you see this flooding system that can give you an idea of what the impact is likely to be, and then you can make some decisions about how to deploy people, how to deploy equipment in order to handle these events, right? So all of this technology has come together, and that is enabling this new governance model. So that governance model starts at the top. The mayor is ultimately responsible for all of the events. Then it goes down to the secretaries, the chief operation officer. There's a new chief operation officer in the city of Rio that was established only after we started this project. That was an organizational change. All the departments sort of dotted line reporting to the chief operation officer, who makes the key decisions for how to manage, how to plan a few days ahead, and how to manage an event that is ongoing until it is completed. So all of this comes together. So let me, that's just a background for what happened and how it happened. I want to show you this video just to give you a sense of what is going on today. It's a production system. It'll give you a sense of how they think about it. This was made by the city of Rio de Janeiro. So let's play the video and then we'll have some discussion afterwards.
Pulsation, people, rhythm, work, beauty, energy, day and night, 24 hours. This city never stops and must not. And that's why the Rio de Janeiro city government created the Rio Operations Center in the neighborhood of Cidade Novo. The Operations Center is a modern decision-making center that operates 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. Entirely equipped with high technology. The heart of the project is found in the control room. It is here that the 70 operators alternate during different shifts to monitor the city's operation. Over 400 cameras installed at strategic points supply images that are viewed on this big screen, the largest in Latin America. The Operations Center assists Rio de Janeiro with its daily routine, with the planning of major events and during emergency situations, such as strong rains, traffic accidents, blackouts, and mudslides. With all of the agencies involved in the city's operation working in an integrated fashion at the Operations Center, local residents now know that Rio de Janeiro is becoming a better city, an intelligent city.
O centro de operações permite que tenha gente olhando para todos os cantos da cidade 24 horas por dia, 7 dias da semana, que era o que não acontecia. Então isso aqui para mim é um sonho realizado. Desde o dia que eu entrei na prefeitura eu sonhava em ter esse espaço para a cidade do Rio de Janeiro, para as pessoas, principalmente isso, as pessoas saberem que elas estão sendo cuidadas.
Prevention and information. The city government invested in the latest technology to forecast the weather and was a pioneer in acquiring a radar for the exclusive purpose of preventing flooding and mudslides. Installed in the neighborhood of Morro do Somaré, this radar can forecast rains that may hit the city. The images are monitored by a team of meteorologists from the entity Alerta Geo. This information is supplied to the High Resolution Weather Forecast, PMAR, a system developed by IBM exclusively to meet the city's characteristics. With this technology, it is possible to forecast storms up to 48 hours in advance. Rio de Janeiro is the only city in Latin America with an exclusive weather system like PMAR. The city government installed sirens along the slopes with a risk for mudslides. If the radar detects strong rains in these regions, the alert system is triggered at the operations center, instructing residents to leave these sites and take shelter at the support points.
Nesta área, moradores dirijam-se para locais seguros ou
The registered residents also receive the alert via torpedo on their cellular phones. At the Rio Operations Center press room, journalists have access to information in real time about events that may affect the city's routine. And right from here, this information can reach citizens directly.
Ações da prefeitura, aconteceu acidente na Avenida Brasil, pista central, sentido centro, nas imediações de paradas de Lucas.
In this way, the citizen will be constantly informed and will have a fast response to any change in Rio de Janeiro's routine. When some anormality is detected in the city, it is here, in the crisis room, that the mayor, secretaries, and other agents meet to make decisions. The mayor's residence and civil defense have a direct connection to this room. The heavy investment in the team and technology make the Rio Operations Center a global reference in the city's planning and operations. This because Rio de Janeiro cannot stop. Rio de Janeiro's city government, always present.
Okay, rather than describing how this system operates, which by the way I can do at any level of detail that anyone wants to talk about over here, I would rather have you ask me questions or make comments about what is interesting to discuss over here, and we can take it from there.
Maybe that after Leif, so we'll go to
After
Q&A
him?
after Leif.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay, very good. So let me just pass it over then, and you need another.
I'm actually going to do the presentation up by the computer here.
Oh, okay, great.
So fantastic.
Go ahead. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So my name is Leif, and I'm currently a graduate student at Parsons, just up the way here. And I'm going to be talking about 3 projects here in a lot of ways that are about understanding and creating data when there isn't that data available, and what people can do about it, and how then that data can be pertinent and shared and informative and get out there. So the first look here is this is what you would see if you went to Google. At this Latin long here is you would see I'm sorry we don't have imagery at this zoom level. And what you're seeing overlaid on top of that is imagery created by people using a really simple, low cost, easy to use technique to capture high quality aerial imagery. And that's what's really created Public Laboratory, the first group that I'm talking about. And this is the procedure here. You can see it, and it's really simple. You take a balloon and a cheap camera and some string, and you send it up in the air, and you take a lot of pictures, and you come back down, and you stitch it together, and you make maps. And this really got legs during the BP Gulf oil spill. when there wasn't much information about what was happening. Things were happening in real time, and information was not coming back to the community in real time. And what really sparked this was you had a bunch of disgruntled residents and a bunch of out-of-work fishermen, and they were looking for ways that they could contribute to finding out what's going on. So there were a lot of boats, and there were a lot of people, and a lot of balloons happened. We got a lot of kite line from Home Depot and cheap cameras, and sent these balloons up, and made a lot of maps, and made a lot of pretty awesome things. This is a mile-long stretch of a beach. This was actually captured from the beach, and you can see areas of the oil sheen. You can see areas of oil washing up. And this imagery was not available anywhere else. This is stuff that you couldn't get from commercial airplanes because there was a no-fly zone implemented over the area. And you couldn't task a satellite fast enough to get this information. And so this is nearly 4 times the resolution as what you'd get from a GeoEye satellite, is what Google uses. And this was captured for about $100. And so this was really the beginning of a much bigger project that's become known as Public Laboratory, with the idea of creating really low-cost tools to get information, to enable people to collect their own information and then disseminate it out from there. And it's really become a lot of different things. And so the idea was, once you capture the imagery, you've got to make a map out of it. It's a lot of fun to fly the balloon, but it's really no good until you can make a map. So one of the guys, Jeff Warren, who was working at MIT, this was right around the time when Hot or Not just came out. And so we made a Hot or Not for map making. And we didn't call it Hot or Not, but it was, is it useful, is it okay, or is it not useful? And so you can see there on the right the types of images we get back. You get a lot of photos from this, but they're so cheap you just put them on an SD card and then sorting them out. So you can see you get some good imagery, you get some really blurry imagery, you get some imagery when the camera swings really wildly under the balloon that's kind of fun, but not really great for maps. So once people were able to sort this information, you could then make a map out of it. And the map making part was even really made easily. And this is an in-browser software called, this was originally called Cartogen, it's now called MapKnitter. You can see it at mapknitter.org. And basically, you take these images and you overlay them against existing maps or existing aerial imagery, and sort of bend and warp and stitch these images until you have a map. And once you're done, this map is saved into an archive. And if you're like most of us in the community and you want to share this map publicly, you just check this map is public. And instantly it becomes part of the public domain. And the map is available in our archive and in a lot of different places. And very recently we've signed a licensing agreement with Google. And so this is, if you go to the Google Maps and you search Western Carolina University, this data is now on Google Maps. And if you look right here at the bottom, you see imagery copyright, Digital Globe, GeoEye, Public Laboratory. So our imagery is now available in the primary maps layer of Google Maps. And this is all public domain. You know, they put the copyright in there just because they have to, but this is stuff that we give away for free. And so this is basically tools that anybody who wants to make a map can go out and use this technology, use this technique really, and it's not really a technology, but use this technique and create imagery that then can be overlaid on Google Maps, which has sort of become the go-to, like it or not, for information. And so it enables people to kind of contribute their own story and contribute their own information to Google Maps, and do a lot more with that. And that's what it's really come to here in New York. We were approached by a group of activists on the Gowanus Canal, and we're saying we're doing a lot of work down here. Things are you know, going to be changing a lot. We've got $500 million in EPA money coming to us through the Superfund designation, and we want to know what's going on. We want to know more about why the canal is so polluted, what's going to change, what things we can do about it, and any interventions that we're doing, are they being effective? Are they having an impact? And so we started a program of seasonal imagery of the Gowanus, and this was from our first mapping. We did it on a January day in icy water. It was pretty brutal, but we had a really great time. And from that, you could start to see really interesting things. We had no idea, but you'd start to see that there on the right, there's melted ice from an inflow. We had no idea that there was warmer water coming into the canal at that point. And the simple aerial imagery, you can see our camera there in and actually a de-icer bottle that we found in the parking lot on the way to the Gowanus that morning. That's how we make a little housing to keep the camera from completely destroying itself if the balloon pops and crashes to the ground. So this is really how it began here in New York in a lot of ways, and it's kind of enabled a lot of people to learn in a lot of different things. This is the map that we made from that day, being in the canoe on the Gowanus Canal, and you can see the snow on the ground, a lot of different things. So this began the kind of the seasonal imagery. This led me to another project I'm going to talk about. And the next project is Don't Flush Me. And so this is me in the canoe there in the middle holding the kite line. And being in the Gowanus Canal, very quickly you realize that things in a lot of ways are not right. You see some stuff in the canal, you smell it, you don't want to taste it, but you almost feel like you are. That it's really pretty wrong, and you can see some images.
It's flowing the other way.
And this is what the Gowanus is famous for.
There comes the garbage.
This is a video posted on YouTube after the Brooklyn microburst. And it shows the water, the sewage overflowing into the Gowanus. So this is my project, Don't Flush Me, that kind of came out of that. And the idea was, how do I connect people to the water to understand what's going on? I realize my slides here are on auto advance, but we'll just go with it. So this is the sensor that I created that allowed me to understand what was happening and when these sewer overflows were going to happen, and get the information out to people. And so I created this website that was just the beginning of that, and trying to understand how people were going to use this information and get the information and then make action upon that. So there are text messages. You know, it's really easy to get information. There is a phone number that I created there. You could call in and get information on voice too if you didn't have a text message plan. And the idea really was to encourage people to know more about the environment and understand that at certain times, if you saved water, you saved water from going into the canal. You saved water from going to the New York Harbor during these sewer overflows. And what I really became interested in, though, is creating a feedback loop of getting the information to people and understanding how they were reacting to it. And so I created this internet-connected light bulb called the Visual Light that would display the information from the sewer level, whether it was safe to flush, whether it was approaching threshold where it was going to overflow, or whether it was overflowing. And the idea is that it would create information in real time. So this is another project. Thanks, Albert, who's sitting back here, for creating this logo for me, called the Flush Capacitor. And the idea is to really encourage that feedback loop one more time over, and understanding how your behaviors throughout the day can really impact things. And so what I made is a little sensor that sits on the top of your toilet. This is a prototype on my toilet, that when you flush, it uploads the information to the internet. And keeps track of your daily activity. And the idea is it's part of the smart bathroom of the future that has a feedback loop about how much water you're using and ways you can save water. In the shower, it shows you how long you've been in the shower to hopefully encourage you to take less of a shower. So this is where all this stuff goes. This is raw sewage, this is Brooklyn, this is a CSO. And this is where the original sensor was designed to go. It was a real pain in the butt to get in there, and the DEP and the Homeland Security didn't really like me being in there. So I revisited the idea and created a sensor that could be installed outside the CSO without having to trespass into DEP territory. And so this is the sensor, the second generation sensor that I created. This is me sticking my arm in the Gowanus, installing the sensor outside of a CSO. And this is really, the idea is to measure the information that's coming out of the CSO. This is, publicly accessible waterway. And the idea is to measure the temperature of the water and the electrical conductivity of the water, which gives you an idea of the makeup of things coming into the canal. So CSO, sewer overflow, is both sanitary sewer and rainwater. And when that combines and flows out this pipe here, it's actually warmer than the receiving water body. So the idea is watch the temperature of the water and see when it goes up. Watch the conductivity of the water to see if there's any contaminants in there, see if that goes up, and then you have a basic guess of when the sewer is overflowing. So this was a really simple sensor. It's solar powered, and it's mounted on this awesome bracket that Ivan Deagle, sitting back here, fabbed up overnight and painted. I think that color is called Gowanus green. So the idea was that it could be a really simple sensor. I mean, it's, I think all parts told are maybe $100, $200, solar panel, a little SMS module, cell phone module that can send a text message, an Arduino, and some sensors that are in the water there. So this is part of the project idea, just to really get the information out there and be able to collect that and be able to show people what's going on. This is the end of Newtown Creek, the other Brooklyn Superfund site. And this is my CSO. This is where my toilet goes to when the sewer overflows, that big double barrel pipe there. And this is what it looks like when it overflows. This is video I took when I went out there to show what the water quality is like during an overflow. And so part of the overall project and the greater project, like I said, is really just trying to connect people to understand their waterways.
We live in a city.
So this is another project. This is the last project I'm going to talk about. This is called the Air Quality Egg.
Air in those spaces matter.
And this is really about another thing that we have a lot of deal a lot with here in New York is air quality. So let me start this up here again real quick. So I think we're stuck watching this again. I'm sorry.
Do you ever think about the air you breathe? We live in a city. We wake up, we work, and we play in the same spaces every day. The air in those spaces matter and affects us all in ways we can see, and also in ways we can't see. The Air Quality Egg is a project working to make the air we breathe more visible. We're a group of makers, designers, and developers who care about our air. Our community is global and diverse, from New York, Amsterdam, London, and the internet at large, working on an open source air quality monitoring system that is cheap enough for anyone to afford and documented well enough for anyone to build. In the last 6 months, we've held workshops around the US and Europe. Along with the solid online community, we're striving to realize a fully democratic air quality data collection system, one that we ourselves want to use, where we live, work, and play. Our system consists of 3 parts. First, a sensor unit lives outside of your door or window, collecting data on carbon monoxide, NO2, temperature, and humidity. Data is sent wirelessly to the egg itself, which lives inside your home, maybe sitting on your desk. Finally, the egg persistently uploads your hyper-local air quality data to an online database. The last step is learning from this data. As an open data network sharing every node globally, we can start to see a much higher resolution picture of the air we breathe. The question is, what will you do with this high-res picture of your city's air quality? Help support our project and learn more about the world you live in and the air we breathe. Thanks for watching.
So this video is from our Kickstarter campaign. We reached funding the first 4 days we had the Kickstarter up. So thanks to anybody who's funded and anybody who's wanting to fund. airqualityegg.com redirects to Kickstarter. But the idea of this really was to enable people to understand their own air quality and to be able to answer that question of like, boy, that bus went by, is it really affecting my life? And the wintertime when all the boilers in New York are burning number 2 fuel oil still in a lot of ways, you know, how bad does it get? We get an ocean breeze here, which is really fantastic, which is a lot better than some cities. But at the same time, you know, we're 8.5 million residents here, and how does that impact us all? So the idea was, as you saw, just to create these really simple sensor nodes, and in a lot of ways, this is the idea of the system we've designed, but it's open, and it's really easy to rebuild this and rejigger this any way you want it to. It's Arduino based, which is in a lot of ways the most accessible way to do sensing. There's a huge community of Arduino enthusiasts, and there's a huge community to support all this. And so it's available for anyone to remix in any fashion they want and create that data upon anything else. And so here's just some more photos of the workshops. And a prototype that we sent around the world actually last year as part of another project that is still collecting data. These $200 sensors were created for a project that's not ongoing anymore, but the sensors are still persistent. So the idea is that people can install these sensors and get that out there and get the information, and then anyone can take that data and remix it, try to recorrelate it, try to average it out, try to understand it anywhere from there. So That's kind of my presentation on governance and data infrastructures and creation, things like that. So, thank you.
While all of you think of questions, I have a quick question for the two of you to think about, which is, I guess, to get philosophical for a second. I'm curious how both of you, I guess, sort of think about how technology influences governance. I mean, this is clearly not a case where you simply take existing governance models and then you add technology to it and nothing changes, only they get, slightly more efficient. It's interesting in your vision, Guru, in Rio de Janeiro, and I think, Nairobi's adopting it next. I mean, there is the notion of the very strong executive branch, that is bringing together and cleaving through bureaucracy. And so I'm curious whether you think that smart city technology applies itself very powerfully to executive branches. And then for Leif, my flip side of that is that I find it interesting that the government or any sort of larger structure out there is sort of absent from that. People can use and upload data, and there's a premise that we'll all take and use it. But it's interesting. Government is sort of absent from the vision altogether. So I guess I'm sort of curious what you think of how governance would apply it. I mean, what agency of the city do you hope would use your data, or where it goes from there? So I don't know if you each want to take a start with that, but
sure. Let me take a crack at it. For better or for worse, we have given a lot of power to our municipal governments, right, to make decisions that affect our lives so directly, and I strongly believe that we should give them the right tools and the right data to be better managers at the end of the day. Because I think that's really what, it's, okay, public policy is, is coming in from the legislation, whatever it is, but there's a whole branch of a city which is all about public management. They're not really doing, policy, they're doing management. They have to make the hard decisions, they have to manage budgets, they have to manage people and resources and, everything else. And my view is we should enable these managers to sort of get into the 21st century way of doing things. It's not, I don't think we should get stuck in, okay, these are sort of political organizations, they're going to be inefficient, they're going to be ineffective at the end of the day, and let them be, kind of a thing. I think it's up to us to make them more modern in terms of decision-making power, which fundamentally for making decisions you need information, and fundamentally for getting information you need technology. And so I sort of take it from public policy, public management, decision-making, information, technology. So that's the stream of logic I have, where at the end of that string, I look at sensors and everything, like kind of you're building and deploying as information providers that give the decision makers a better view of what makes more sense. Of course, each of us make decisions in our own individual lives, and so we have to have enough information about things that matter to us. But the information that our governments, right, city governments, for example, or public managers, let's think of them as public managers for the moment, as opposed to some kind of public policy engine which we may or may not agree with, right? But public managers have to use both information from the physical world and information from the people in an urban community to make the right decisions. And that's where I think technology comes in. Communication technology for people, sensor and actuator technology for the physical world. And that's sort of the bottom line for me. And we can talk more about that as well.
So, I mean,
we can, I can take it.
I have to say, I totally think that the people at the Department of Environmental Protection here in New York who manage 1.5 billion gallons of sewage every day in the city do an incredible job at that. And I don't fault them at all. And in fact, I don't absolutely want that job at all. But the reality of it is that's enabled New York to be New York. I mean, it's enabled all of us to be here and all of us to live. And so from that sense, the information that helps them to do their job better is spectacularly important. From the other side of it is I approached my project and I wanted to understand the nature of CSO overflow and how water quality changes in New York. The CSOs, or this sewage discharge, is the #1 source of water quality issues in the New York Harbor. And I started going around and started asking the DEP, and they don't publish that information. That information is not collected in a lot of ways and is not available. And so my approach was, well, I'm a user, I'm contributing to this, I can be a creator of the data. And so in a lot of ways, it's a very parallel thing, and this top-down, bottom-up, I would say is, it's all working together, but the work that I do with Public Laboratory and the work that I do with Don't Flush Me, an Air Quality Egg, was about that, of saying, well, we're gonna take the charge. I don't see the DEP I've talked to them a lot about this project, about understanding sensing, and the DEP engineers say, this is fantastic. And I say, okay, well, help me do this. And they say, well, we're 3-4 years out on this, and it goes through the process, and it's about what I get out of them. And they all, I could see the kind of the glimmer in their eye. These engineers are saying, like, fantastic. If I had free reign, I would totally jump on this, and this is something I have. And so, in a lot of ways, I'm trying to understand where the blend is because I want projects like this to succeed and not be a one-off sensor in the canal or these individual places. And they need to be at scale in a lot of ways to really understand the information. To be successful, they have to be sort of at scale. And there's a real blend there that I hope can happen, is understanding of, so if you can develop an iPhone app, or you can create a physical piece of hardware, or you can ask a question, you should be able to answer that question if you wanted to. If you're creative enough or inspired enough to be able to go out and, you should answer that question and have that be accessible, And one thing I didn't put in my slide here, and it's actually really pretty interesting, is Public Laboratory did a workshop in Rio, and they taught people how to do mapping, balloon mapping and kite mapping in Rio. And the city was really excited about this, and that information is actually available in the Rio Command Center on maps on this big wall, and it's based around communities saying, we have an issue here. Here is where we think the next landslide is going to damage this problem. These are buildings that we think are issues. These are settlements that are happening now that may not be on your map, and we're actually going out and mapping them and then giving that information to you to understand what's going on. So in one sense, that's the give and take that's happening now.
Hey, if you don't mind, I want to add one more thought. Based on Lee's comments. This idea of sort of a participatory, democracy, right? Which technology has enabled in some ways. I mean, I sometimes work with cities which are extremely top down. By which I mean, Ho Chi Minh City, for example, right? Yeah. Or, there are several cities in China which are, oh, this is not on? Sorry.
Nope, just share. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so, so what I was trying to say was that the top-down thought is not only about sort of pushing decisions down and sort of up, down the throat of a lot of people, but if you think about a true participatory democracy, a city like Rio or New York, right, which is where you want to have instant feedback about any public management decision or a public policy decision or a public planning decision that is likely to be made or has just been made, right? How are things working? How should things work in the future? Why are things not working or working? Everything from taking pictures from the streets and sending the right information to having networks of sensors that can give you that kind of information, I think is the best blend, if you will, of the top-down and bottom-up, meaning that, with the information coming from the ground, I think public managers are able to make even better decisions than they would have if you just think of, just information that they have about how the city is working or whatever. So I think it's got to be a mix of the two at the right level. Right?
All right, questions from the audience. Let's go to far back first. Do we have a mic? Just go ahead and yell it out.
I'll repeat the question.
I really enjoy your presentation lecture. I like very much the balloon mapping, the balloon mapping. I have a question about the sensor. When you use the sensor, do you need to have a computer? And I'm asking this question specifically because a lot of fish you were showing were like in really like, I imagine they would be really in a low income neighborhood. I'm not talking about New York and so on, but for example, if you go to Rio or to India or to, we have a lot of these problems, really low income neighborhoods. So if you imagine you censor this, what the people when their pages don't have an access to a laptop at all. So if you want to use sensors and if you want to gather information this way, how do you imagine really low income neighborhood to do that?
Yeah, I mean that's a huge problem of information accessibility, and that was one of the things I think is being tackled now with SMS and this kind of text message and phone alerts, and I think in a lot of ways it's not ideal. You can get the information out to people, but what I'm really interested in is creating that feedback loop so that people can understand that when I take action on an alert, that actually means something. So you pass out an alert to someone and it's just, you're throwing it out the window. You're hoping that it lands on somebody who cares, who's going to take action on that. And I don't know if the perfect system exists yet. The idea of actually creating a piece of hardware that could be either a single user's hardware or it could be a municipal alert system. There's been a lot of talk about putting an alert system outside the subway station so that people get off the train, you understand the nature of the sewer system there and understand, hey, my neighborhood's in a red light area, so not in that sense, but I understand that today is not the best day to go home and do 5 loads of laundry. But I think that's a great question, and it's something that I've really been trying to tackle as a designer, is understanding how do you get that information out? Is it is it flags? Do you raise a flag in out west where I lived for a while? You had a red flag day, and that was for higher fire danger. And so you would actually physically see flags and see signs posted, that said this. And so does it come to that in places potentially? And until technology has a greater penetration, I think that it's lacking in a lot of ways. But I think that there's people who are receptive to the information will find a way to get it. It's just a matter of making it available in every form possible. It's kind of my thought.
Actually, I want to add something based on my experience from India, which is one of the fastest growing mobile phone usage, user community, right? So when I moved back to New York from India in 2010, we had something like 10 million new mobile phone users per month registering. So that's a tremendous number, and I think we're going to have people. I think we're going to have pretty much full coverage of mobile phones, right, at some point in the not too distant future. So the point is that if we can figure out how we can use mobile phones, and I'm not talking smartphones. I mean, all of us here are used to smartphones, and we think of phones as smartphones. But when you live in India, you think of a $30, $20 phone, which is a very basic phone, as in some cases your livelihood, and in many cases as your connection to the rest of the world. And if we can figure out how to get all of this information into some kind of a server system in the back end, right? I mean, that coming from IBM, that's the most natural way for me to think about it. So a municipality or a community government can potentially provide that infrastructure that can collect all of the data, process it in a fashion that would make it more useful to the community, and just send out very tiny bits of information to mobile phones, which everybody can afford pretty much these days. And it's very easy with low bandwidth. You can get a lot of really good information because you can get the equivalent of text messages and other kinds of very quick alerts. I'm not talking about users going off to the web on their phones and downloading information, which is not going to work. I know that it's not going to work because 60% or 70% of the phones are not going to be able to do it. So this is just pushing small bits of information when it makes sense. Alerts. I think you can use some of the idea that you have, I think, in these sensor networks, and just push it out to the right people at the right time. That'll make a huge difference, I believe.
More questions? Go, Mr. Townsend. Sweet.
So I wanted to ask about cloud computing and jurisdiction, because cloud computing is really important to scaling both of these projects. So for IBM, you roll this out to smaller cities, right? They may not be able to afford that big building and data center. You may be hosting it somewhere else in the country, somewhere else in the world. What does that mean in the sense that data is flowing across boundaries? The city may not even be able to control it. And Leif, for the projects you're doing, what does it mean that communities are kind of divulging this data about themselves openly to a global audience? They don't know how it's going to be used, potentially against them.
Great. Do you want me to go first?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So this is a great question, by the way, and I think it's very relevant to what we are trying to do right now for communities around the world, which are not able to afford, that big operation center that you saw for Rio. I mean, most cities are not able to afford that. They don't have the budgets to do it. So the idea is to figure out if we can share infrastructures that are common across multiple cities. So for example, if you look at let's say a cluster of cities and towns and even villages, right, small communities that exist in a geographically close area, it's much easier to think about some kind of a larger organization, whether it's an association of cities or a league of cities, or some kind of an organization, which, by the way, in many parts of the world already exist to provide shared services. These days the leagues and associations do simple things. They do things like, instead of every little community ordering their own pencils, the association orders a huge amount of pencils and just distributes it. So they're providing a shared service for, in this case, procuring pencils, right, or something else. So why not have these kinds of associations provide a computing infrastructure, think of it as cloud computing if you want, which can be shared across all of these communities for doing simple things like managing their budgets in an online way, or managing their maintaining their parks, or doing doing water plumbing network management, which basically means keeping track of all the assets that you have in cities, which can be a bus or a truck or anything else, right? If you keep all of those things, keep track of all of those things in an online fashion, you end up being much more effective in using those resources, and that can be shared, right? So cities and towns and communities can pool their limited budgets and get a shared infrastructure that they can all then use the applications on top of. I'm hoping that in the not too distant future we will start being able to deploy these kinds of shared common cloud centers or data centers or whatever you want to call it, where these associations become the owners, and they're able to provide this for a large number of cities. And I'm thinking hundreds of cities at a time.
So in terms of the privacy thing, does anybody remember there was a website that was created a while back, and I can't remember exactly what it's called. I think it was like Rob Me or something like that, that aggregated your social media feed from Twitter and Facebook and Foursquare and stuff like that, and made a map of when it was the best time to rob somebody. And it was like where you live and when you're not there and all this stuff. And so in a lot of ways, public information is incredibly useful in a lot of ways that people don't ever think about it. And so keeping information that would need to be private, or stripping out some of the information that would create those privacy concerns is really important in a lot of ways. And it's something that's come to the forefront, and it's being worked on in a lot of ways around the community, which, love it or hate it, is called the Internet of Things. And there's a group now pushing for this Internet of Things Bill of Rights, and one of those is that your private data is private and can be maintained that way, which means that If you're using data that's part of an organization that subscribes to this Internet Things Bill of Rights, is that if you upload private information to a service or a site somewhere, that if any point you want to keep it private or make it private, you should be able to access that data and delete it forever and remove it or sanitize it however you want it to. And so I totally agree with that. In a lot of ways, though, I think that we're sharing a lot more private data in a lot of ways all the time. And there was a great conversation last week about Foursquare and Twitter and things like that, about all the stuff that you can do with someone's Foursquare check-ins, and the maps on the wall in there are about Foursquare check-ins. And so I think that in some ways that people are willing to share this stuff. And so I'm hoping that in a lot of ways that people will be more willing to share things like, in my case, the water usage, your toilet flushes, or how long you shower, and things like that. In a lot of ways, have very little privacy concerns for other ways, but help people understand their impact on the system. So privacy obviously always a big issue, but I think in a lot of ways that those barriers are being negotiated.
More questions, please. One from this side, and you were patient there.
Question about the vulnerability of centralized technology. When the World Trade Center went down, our operations center was wiped out. When the electrical blackout happened, none of our cell phones worked. What's your plan B for Rio? Should none of the people be able to get to the center if a real disaster happens?
Great question. Rather than talk about what's going on in Rio, which is still very early, I want to talk about a good practice like in the city of Madrid, which has a 3-level system. It has a primary center for, this is only for police and emergencies. So there's a primary center, there's a secondary center which is several miles away, and then they have mobile centers that are connected to the same information, but can be deployed even in suburban areas around the city. So they have, thankfully, after some of the terrorist incidents that happened there, they planned for really bad situations. So the distance between their primary and secondary command centers is actually fairly large. I think it's about 25 miles. There is, there are those backup systems. Now, does every city that I work with have a great resiliency plan? I don't think so. Cities are in different stages, and if a city has the budget or the necessity, the need for doing this, the techniques are available, I believe. It's a question of how they can prioritize it, and I'm sure that even in the city of Rio that this will become pretty state of the art in the not too distant future.
Question from somewhere on this side, in the back corner. Reply.
I guess I was just wondering if there were more examples you can go through in Rio or other cities with a big operation center like this that make opportunities for citizen input or sensors or feedback mechanisms available, whether that's something like an equivalent of a 301 type system, or if there's actually like the equivalent of an API for some of these citizen sensing devices, or what is the interface to get data in or to make it more self-serve?
Excellent question. There's a lot of cities now getting into an open data platform kind of a movement, which I think is tremendous, because it not only collects all of this data but puts it in a sort of a platform with a specific data format and a metadata API that you can get access to and you can build applications on top of. So I would say some of the Scandinavian countries are probably leading this right now. The city of Helsinki, for example, has a very good open data system that's already in place to some degree, and and it's going to expand to, I think, the 5 cities across Europe, which includes a couple of cities in mainland Europe and one in England. So this open data movement is also picking up steam here in the US. I can't say that there is an established sort of benchmark, right, in the US at this point in time that I can say, look, he's a good example that you can go from. But one of the things that we want to do as one company, right? It's a limited amount of things that we can do as one company, but there's a whole industry behind getting this information out. And one of the things that we're doing is in IBM is called City Forward. City Forward is a website you can go to, and we are asking cities from all around the world to upload. Actually, it's not only cities, it's anybody, any private citizen can upload large data sets onto this website, and it's ingested into a sort of a data warehouse, and there are several tools that are available on City Forward for you to slice and dice the data in many ways. So it's not an API that you can program applications on top of, but you can at least look at the data in interesting ways. You can actually compare cities, for example, their crime rates or their education history and things like this can be compared across multiple cities, which becomes at least a basis for people to start, asking the right questions in multiple cities.
Just like to also note that City Forward is a creation of John Tolbo, the now CTO of Chicago.
That's correct. Yeah.
Question, the glasses in the back row there. Yes, you.
I had to make sure there wasn't anyone else behind me, sorry. I guess my question is sort of related to City Forward is a good example of something that sort of integrates different data sets that have been provided by the public. It seems like the RIO project is also maybe much more integrated than the work of Public Laboratory. I guess given sort of Greg's earlier comment that these tools sort of privilege certain questions and outcomes, I'm wondering what can be done to sort of get more open source tools in the decision support space to sort of have, maybe more of a sort of plurality of potential outcomes there. If that makes sense.
Okay, so I'll give you my initial thoughts here, because I'm not sure that that I've thought through all the implications here. I think it's a great question because we want, at the end of the day, I think this is this is a public sector kind of an initiative, right? So the broader the involvement and the more the transparency, the better at the end of the day, right? Mm-hmm. So and governments, when I talk to city governments, they all start by saying, look, I want to know what my citizens are thinking, and I want them to know what the government is doing, right? At least the good politicians and managers want to do that. The tools that can give you the open data platform kind of transparency, I think are a great first step before you go into the decision-making tools themselves that use the data, that have the processes or the policies that help people make the right decisions. I think it's going to be many years down the road before we start seeing that in the open, in the public realm. I would say that we will get probably 70% or 80% of the value of transparency if we can just get the right open data platforms. I'm not even sure, how we want to put standardized tools or open tools in this community at this point in time. So that's why I'm saying, I haven't really thought through what it means to have open source, publicly managed tools out there. But I think data is really the first step, and years down the road, I think maybe we can have more decision-making support tools as well. Unless you can explain to me, what exactly, what kinds of tools you're thinking. I wouldn't want to put decision-making tools in the public domain as step one. I would put the data first.
A weather model is a good example.
Yeah.
I guess I don't want to sort of hijack the conversation, so maybe we can catch up after.
I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that, Lee? About open source tools that are more like decision-making tools?
Yeah, I think that in a lot of ways, what I've been working on is the data collection, and it's about sort of the personal decision, the decision that I'm going to make about something. And in a lot of ways, I think that's probably related to the greater whole. So if it's a decision that I'm interested in making and I'm trying to create the information that can help me make that decision, that's a decision that someone else is going to make as well. To take a long shower, to do a little laundry, to get on the subway, to take the train versus the bus versus a cab versus walking versus a bike are all decisions that we make every day. and everyone else in the city makes that same decision too. And so, you know, I don't know if there's a decision-making platform per se, but I think that that information could potentially reveal how decisions are made on an individual basis, which is kind of interesting, where I'm interested in coming from. And then those individual decisions sort of aggregate into the whole. That's kind of the very amorphous idea of what I would have.
Okay. A question on the side. Jeff, since you're the host, I think you're privileged.
Well, you're the host.
All right, well.
I guess I'm just curious about questions of liability and where these systems might, when they go wrong, what might happen. I mean, you know, we looked at the Gulf oil spill, and it was interesting where, you know, BP was trying to blame Halliburton, and Halliburton was trying to blame their local subcontracted oil services firm. And, you know, whether or not they ever really figured out who was trying to pass the buck is an open question. But I guess I'm curious, for instance, like if the Don't Flush Me network were to say, hey, you know, it's totally safe to flush, meanwhile everyone actually inadvertently, you know, has a stormwater overflow into the Gowanus Canal. I guess I'm just curious, would the city come after you? Would you have to defend yourself to the city sanitation services? I guess I'm just curious about where those sort of, you know, we mentioned jurisdiction, but jurisdiction, liability, responsibility, I guess I'm curious about where those things come together.
Yeah, I mean, that's a thing that's a conversation I've had with DEP, and it turns out that they have sensors at about 100 of these overflow locations that they use to monitor for dry weather discharge, which is what the city gets fined for. The city's permitted to do wet weather discharge, but anything happens during a dry day, they get a fine for that. And so they monitor that. And I asked them, I said, well, why don't, you know, it's the same thing, dry or wet. You're looking for an overflow. Why don't you publish that data? And that's exactly their response was, we don't feel that it's accurate enough. And in a lot of ways, any information that I create is not going to be accurate in any stretch of the means either. And I've always published that. And the new sensor I have is measuring water temperature. You know, and so the idea is to create sort of an information layer on top of that that says, well, here's a good shot, here's a good guess. And in a lot of ways, I've taken the analogy of the weatherman, the guy who, what's the anecdote? He can be wrong every day. He goes to work and still keep his job. You know, I mean, it's getting better with the weather models and things like that, but it's still a real big guess. And so, you know, I think that there's a big issue of agency around the data and understanding the kind of the formality of it. And that was one of the things about public laboratories mapping tools, is it gave people the tools to create something as high resolution and as high end as an aerial satellite photo that's accurate, you know, to the pixel and to the inch in a lot of ways. But it's also up to the person who made the map, and it's also up to the person who calibrated the sensor to collect that information and collect that data. And so I hope that eventually there's enough that you can average out those bad and those anomalies, but I don't really know the super answer to that question, besides that it's an issue, and that sensor networks, I think, are coming up to the point where they can average each other out. And crowdsourcing and collection, you kind of have to do a little bit of math on. We were just talking about a math conversation before the presentations, but that's kind of my opinion on that. I mean, I'm rambling here, but.
I don't know if I want to add something. You know, the smart meters, right? Which
that added massive amounts to their bills in California?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, you know, I'm just thinking, you know, who's, you know, I think we're still in such an early phase. We don't know who's liable for what yet. I think there's got to be a lot more experimentation on the field before we decide, you know, what has to happen. You know, whether it's the individuals, the utility companies, you know, the governments, or you know, in some cases it's actually the service providers. You know, the telecommunication service providers who manage the network that collects the data. And even, I mean, just to tell you the worst case, right? Even in today's internet, it's very difficult to pinpoint who's liable for, you know, for some bad decisions that can happen, because there's so many players in the ecosystem, and I don't think we've figured it out yet. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Great. Other questions? You were waiting patiently, please. Yes, you.
I have a question about surveillance. I was just watching that video of Rio and seeing that image of all of the different, pictures on that giant screen. I'm wondering exactly how extensive or how much more extensive the surveillance system has become in Rio since implementing the command center, and if it's become more extensive. Does it extend out to the periphery of the city, and how is the police sort of using that information? And kind of what the reaction of this citizenry is of being more heavily surveilled, if they are. And then for Leif, I can't really figure out how to form my question in terms of surveillance for you, but other than to think that your project seems to be more about people taking agency in their own sort of surveillance, but if you could add your thoughts on that too.
So, first of all, I got to say that the city government of Rio is not really responsible for policing. It's the state government, which has its own infrastructure, it has its own military police power and all of that. So they have a different system altogether. The city government uses the video cameras for understanding the status of events, especially when emergencies happen, so they can make the right decisions. Right, so there is the obvious application of, the more visibility they have into, especially the high-risk areas, the better decisions they can make about what is really going on and how they can be helped. Right, so it's what they call civil defense, which is really a social sort of, civil police kind of a thing, who are more for emergency management and event management rather than policing. Right, so Rio is not one of those cities which has a huge network of video cameras. Even New York City has many more cameras. I mean, New York City or Chicago has thousands of cameras, and Rio only has hundreds of cameras. So it's not exactly extended to the point where it is, causing, any other issues. But at the end of the day, I think the human, sensors, if you will, right? I mean, there's a lot of people on the streets who are watching for bad things that could happen, are indispensable. It's not going to be possible to do everything through video cameras, because especially when you scale to thousands, it's impossible for people to really productively watch and see what to do. You can't have that many people in the command center to watch these cameras. So all you can do really is to have alerts when something bad seems to be going on. So for example, if you have a if you have a car that is going in the wrong direction on a one-way street, or if there's a security threat, like there's some large object that's been abandoned in the middle of a street, right? Those kinds of events can be technologically tracked and alerts sent. Look, camera number so and so seems to be saying this, that kind of thing. So all of these are being used. I mean, it's being used the same way that New York uses, video cameras. So it's no different, is what I would say in the case of Rio. All right.
So the surveillance thing is an interesting question, because the public laboratory team has had to deal with that. Because basically what we offer in this technique is a $100 way for you to spy on your neighbor. And so we leave that up to the individual user in a lot of ways. But on the kind of community level, what we've really done is let the communities come to us. And it happened on the Gowanus, it happened on the Gulf, and in a lot of places, what happens is people come and say, hey, we saw this technique, we saw this, awesome images, they're really fantastic. We're interested in using your tool. And so we're fantastic, we'll come out and we'll do a workshop, we'll show you how to do it. And what we do is we engage the community, the people who are actually going to be surveilling the pond, to say, here's how it works, here's what we're doing, here's how the image is, you get to make the maps. In a lot of ways, that sort of alleviates the surveillance aspect of it, because we're basically surveilling ourselves. But yeah, I mean, it leads a really interesting question, because very quickly, the information you collect from these photos could lead you to determine, say, it's my neighbor that's actually causing pollution versus a corporation, and that's sort of up to the data analysis side. But
or questions? You were first.
Okay. With this data collection, like, you seem to be able to like coordinate events, and you're looking at people. How does this like begin to apply to a more permanent, like city level, like infrastructure, and how do you see this data being able to affect that kind of change?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the second part of your question.
Just like, how would you apply this to something more permanent?
Permanent? Yeah. Okay. So this actually is a good question, because I want to go back to one of the first themes that I started off with, which is the connection or the feedback loop between the planning and the operations of a city. So just like the plan for an urban area provides some kind of constraints or requirements on the long-term evolution of a community, the day-to-day activities and the day-to-day successes and failures of a city can provide information historically about how the next round of planning ought to be done, right? So for example, if you see that the most obvious example is traffic, right? Once you see that you are having a certain pattern of traffic congestion in a city, in a specific area of the city, that can obviously be the input into the next generation of transportation planning. Similarly, if you look at the occurrence of flooding in this case, in the case of Rio de Janeiro, for example, if you start seeing more incidents of flooding in certain areas because of poor planning or because of the way it organically has developed, that provides information into how to prevent flooding in those areas for the city planners in a long term. Like for example, how to build the drainage systems, how to build the roads in order for access to be better for communities that are at risk and so forth. So all of that kind of feedback that goes from the historical sort of events that have happened back into the planning cycle, I think is a very important aspect of how this data can help in long-term planning. Now, having said that, I've also spoken to a lot of urban planners around the world who have accepted that most of the principles on which they design urban areas become out of date very quickly, because they can't really foresee the demographic trends and changes, especially in the emerging markets, like I said before. Because things change so dramatically. The urban planner for Singapore thought that he had designed Singapore for the next 100 years, but after 10 years, all of his assumptions were gone. So he said it's more important for us to have, make some basic principles in the urban plan, but then be able to adapt to the changes in the system, and that adaptation of the plan, whether it's the infrastructure level, transportation, water, energy, or any of these infrastructure levels, the ability to adapt itself is probably more important than to have the best plan that you can have at the beginning. And in order to adapt yourself, what you really need is a real-time data, right? What is going on right now? How are things changing from last year to this year, from 5 years ago to this year, and then you make the adaptations necessary. So that's where I think data comes in.
We have time for one last question. Mr. Ricci?
Question for Dr. Banavar with regard to the corporate government relationship. Now, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is effectively IBM is selling a proprietary system to a municipality along with a suite of support services for however the lifetime of however it's done today. And essentially this is going to create a critical interdependency between the government and IBM. Now this isn't this is not akin to, let's say, the school district cafeteria contract that can be put up for bidding every 5 years between, let's say, Aramark and Restaurant Associates. Rather, essentially, it's a bilateral dependency. And a problem I could foresee arising for IBM is that if you do your job too well, and the municipality becomes too dependent on your system, you suddenly become exposed to a number of risks. Be it, for example, governments are not rational actors. They are creatures of politics. So there could be issues with regard to reputational risk come election time. Due to short-termism, changes in priorities could, shall we say, make you a target rather than a recipient. If you were to have significant swings due to populism, you could even see, IBM or your personnel or your IP be seized. How do you manage the relationship between, IBM and your governmental clients?
Okay, this is a corporate policy and strategy discussion, which I'm not sure how deep we want to get into in this forum. Let me start by saying that IBM has a very significant public sector business. Over the history, we have worked with federal government, state governments, and more recently now we're starting to work with local governments. So I don't see why the relationship between any corporate entity, not just IBM, and a local government should be different now than it is, has been for the last several decades when many corporate entities have been working with governments. So there's 2 or 3 basic contractual mechanisms that corporations work with governments, right? There is one contractual mechanism that's called, it's the equivalent of a concessionary, which, for example, if you have a private sector entity that runs the subway system in New York City, you have a 10 or 20-year contract to run it at a certain level of service level agreements, and you are held to those service level agreements with fines and et cetera, et cetera. So as long as the service level agreements are met, you are doing your part of it, and the government must do their part of it by law, right? So there's that. Then there is sort of these exceptional situations which could be because of some dramatic changes. Like, for example, there's an earthquake in Chile, and they need to put together a huge amount of housing in a very short period of time. They can contract this to a local company which can build, private sector company which can build it based on a certain set of short-term things that you deliver, and the city government takes over at this point, or the state or the country government takes over at that point, and they become responsible for managing it internally. In the case of IT, right, which is what we're talking about in this case.
Essentially non-fungible, non-replaceable, or non-substitutable infrastructure.
That's right. Non-substitutable infrastructure. I believe that city governments are a lot less mature in handling this compared to state governments or national governments. So it's an evolving area. What I foresee will happen, okay, is that there's going to be, based upon the cloud computing thought that we talked about a little earlier, there's going to be a lot more similarity to the sort of the concessionary kind of model in the future. We're not there yet because the local governments are not yet ready in their procurement mechanisms and so forth to hire a company to do long-term IT support services like they would for an infrastructure like a transportation or energy or something like that. They're not there yet. But I expect them to go in that direction, and maybe 5 years down the road, after we have enough examples of success because of information technology, maybe that'll accelerate that trend.
Right. I mean, just as a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
The concessionary model, I'm not quite certain if that's an accurate analogy, just given the fact that you don't tear up the subway rails and replace them with a different gauge every time that you change certain operators. So, I mean, this, I guess, gets back to a question that was being asked earlier about a migration toward open source systems and essentially the creation of standards that would essentially allow for the infrastructure to become to become standardized, and the operators who are the external people
Would you please do us a favor for commoditizing yourself?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
I mean, that would seem to be the only safe way for a corporation to move forward with this, if they're going to be a long-term operator of this.
Well, okay. So I mean, there's two separate discussions here. One is about how, you asked about the relationship between a corporation and a government. Mm-hmm. And I think a concessionary type of a model, which is essentially a long-term contract with a specific set of service level agreements, I think is a fair way to handle that. Okay. But I think you're asking a separate aspect of your question is about how dependent will that infrastructure become, or will the government become, on a particular information technology infrastructure if it is not open enough for other players to play in, right? And
the effect it has on you.
Well, now that's a separate. I don't think I want to talk about that over here. But let's talk about what effect it has on the government, which is probably the more important question for this group, right? I want to go back to the analogy with let's say open source operating systems, right? Like Linux, for example, right? If you end up having a foundation that is available for people to modify if they want to, and at the least it has the open APIs and the open data platform, you can build any number of applications and you can plug it into that kind of underlying platform. That would be a fairly good way for a city to use, IT as a long-term strategy, because then they've created a platform that is extensible and that is pluggable, right? Mm-hmm. That is the kind of model that we are trying to shoot for. So we have a new operating platform that we call the Intelligent Operations Center. And that Intelligent Operations Center, or the IOC, has essentially an open API at this point in time. And I don't see why it couldn't evolve in the direction of making it, extensible in many ways in the future. So that's, I think, the second part of your question.
Well,
right?
I think that actually does answer the.
I was going to say, save the rest for afterwards. We're ending there. Can I have another round of applause, please? And so if you found this interesting, the next X Cities installment is next Thursday, actually, X Cities 4. The theme of that one is markets, and we're going to have representatives of 2 instance cities being built from scratch as smart cities, Living Planet and Planet Valley in Portugal, and Songdo, South Korea. And they're going to here to talk about basically sort of markets in the sense of public-private partnerships and investing in building cities from scratch, and then also, the limits of actually making a city that is for profit in terms of what services you offer to. So hopefully you'll join us then, and we'll see you next Thursday. But please stick around and pepper them with some questions.
Hi.